developments here. I've been talking to senior administration officials throughout the night and the early morning, and they tell me they're not only concerned about the fallout with allies, but with lawmakers on Capitol Hill as well. Obviously, there has been a sharp backlash toward Democrats and Republicans.
Good morning. As you know, the president of Turkey is shortly going to be arriving at the White House. But prior to his arrival, as I promised, General McMaster is going to give an update on the president's trip that starts this Friday. And I know there are some additional questions regarding some news of the day. So without further ado, General McMaster.
Good morning, everybody. Hey, last week we discussed the president's upcoming trip. I promised I'd come back and go through the schedule in more detail. I'm happy to do that today. And Sean tells me there's another topic you might want to talk about as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that after we go through the schedule here. But first of all, Secretary Tillerson will accompany the president for most of the trip, breaking off just before the G7 meeting. And as you know, the trip will begin in Saudi Arabia. It's a historic trip. After an arrival ceremony in Riyadh, the president will have coffee with King Salman, attend a royal banquet, and hold bilateral meetings with the king, the crown prince, and the deputy crown prince. He will also participate in a signing ceremony of several agreements that will further solidify U.S.-Saudi security and economic cooperation. That evening, the president and the first lady will join members of the Saudi royal family for an official dinner. The next day, the president will hold bilateral meetings with Gulf Cooperation Council leaders, as well as broader meetings with all the Gulf state leaders. In the afternoon, he will meet and have lunch with leaders of more than 50 Muslim countries, where he will deliver an inspiring yet direct speech on the need to confront radical ideology and his hopes, the president's hopes, for a peaceful vision of Islam to dominate across the world. The speech is intended to unite the broader Muslim world against common enemies of all civilization and to demonstrate America's commitment to our Muslim partners. The president will then participate in the inauguration of a new center intended to fight radicalism and promote moderation. By establishing and operating this center, our Muslim friends, including Saudi Arabia, are taking a firm stand against extremism and those who use a perverted interpretation of religion to advance their criminal and political agendas. The president also looks forward to participating in a Twitter forum with young people who will be able to live tweet his remarks to people all over the world. The president will then continue on to Jerusalem, where he will meet with President Rivlin and lay a wreath at Yad Vashem. The president will then deliver remarks at the Israel Museum and celebrate the unique history of Israel and of the Jewish people, while reaffirming America's unshakable bond with our closest ally in the Middle East. Later that day, he will meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu. That night, the president and the First Lady will join the Prime Minister and Mrs. Netanyahu for a private dinner. The following morning, the president will meet President Abbas in Bethlehem, where he will convey his administration's eagerness to facilitate an agreement that ends the conflict. And he will urge Palestinian leaders to take steps that will help lead to peace. And he will visit the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and say a prayer at the Western Wall. In Rome the next day, the president will have an audience with the Pope at the Vatican. He looks forward to celebrating the rich contributions of Catholics to America and to the world, and to discussing a range of issues of mutual concern, some of which I summarized last time. Before leaving the Vatican, the president will meet the Cardinal Secretary of State and will tour St. Peter's. Later that afternoon, the president will meet with the King and the Prime Minister of Belgium and the heads of state and government of the host country to the NATO alliance. He'll also meet President Mattarella before departing Rome for Brussels. The next morning, the president will travel to the EU headquarters to meet with the presidents of the European Union and of the European Council. He'll then hold a working lunch with the newly elected president of France, whom he will meet in person for the first time. That afternoon, the President will deliver remarks at the unveiling of NATO's memorial to our shared struggle in front of a piece of the Berlin Wall and a segment of the World Trade Center. He will reaffirm America's commitment to the alliance and repeat his insistence that for the good of the alliance, all members must share responsibility and share burden. Joined by Secretary Mattis, he will participate in the NATO leaders meeting and dinner before then traveling to Sicily for the G7. Throughout the summit, he will meet bilaterally with leaders, including the Italian Prime Minister. In the formal meetings, he will press America's economic agenda and call for greater security cooperation. On the first night of the summit, he will also attend a concert performed by the La Scala Philharmonic Orchestra, followed by a leaders' dinner hosted by the President of Italy. Before departing Italy for home, the President will speak to American and Allied servicemen and women and their families. He will thank them for their sacrifices they all make to keep us safe, and also recap the highlights and accomplishments of the trip. And so I'll ask Sean to call on any of you who have questions. Thanks.
General McMaster. Thanks a lot, General McMaster. You came out to the stakeout area yesterday, and coming out to the stakeout area, you said that the Washington Post story, which came out late yesterday afternoon, was false. Do you stick by that assertion? Do you think that every element of that story is false? And do you have anything to correct in terms of what you said at the podium yesterday afternoon?
No, I stand by my statement that I made yesterday. And what I'm saying is really the premise of that article is false, that in any way the President had a conversation that was inappropriate or that resulted in any kind of lapse in national security. And so I think the real issue, and I think what I'd like to see really debated more, is that our national security has been put at risk by those violating confidentiality and those releasing information to the press that could be used connected with other information available to make American citizens and others more vulnerable.
The General was classifying information. General was classifying information released.
Sir, can you tell us if the Prime Minister Netanyahu will join President Trump at the Western Wall? And does the President believe that the Western Wall is part of his risk?
It's part of his. I'm sorry. No Israeli leaders will join President Trump to the Western Wall. He's going to the Western Wall mainly in connection with the theme to connect with three of the world's great religions and to advance, to pay homage at each of these religious sites that he's visiting, but also to highlight the theme that we all have to be united against what are really the enemies of all civilized people, and that we have to be joined together with an agenda of tolerance and moderation.
General, I just want to try to dig into some details of this reporting on the President's conversations with the Russians. Are you denying that he revealed information that was given to the U.S. by an intelligence partner?
So what we don't do is discuss what is and what wasn't classified. What I will tell you is in the context of that discussion, what the President discussed with the Foreign Minister was wholly appropriate to that conversation and is consistent with the routine sharing of information between the President and any leaders with whom he's engaged.
Was it information the U.S. received from an intelligence partner?
I'm not going to be the one to confirm that sort of information that could jeopardize our security.
U.S. allies that do have these type of intelligence sharing relationships with the U.S. will stop providing that information?
No, I'm not concerned at all. That conversation was wholly appropriate to the conversation, and I think wholly appropriate what the expectations are of our intelligence partners.
If I can follow on that, General, have you reached out to foreign partners who might have contributed such information to the U.S. and talked to them about it, tried to reassure them? If so, what was their reaction?
I have not, and I'm not sure what conversations have been held about that.
Carol.
Going back to what you were saying earlier, if there was nothing that the President shared that he shouldn't have shared, why did his counterterrorism advisor contact the NSA and the CIA about what he had said?
You know, I would say maybe from an overabundance of caution, but I'm not sure. I mean, I've not talked to Mr. Bossert about why he reached out.
There, so what? Presumably, you would understand why there was a reason to reach out.
Sure, I was in the room. The Secretary of State was in the room, as you know. The Deputy Assistant, the Deputy Advisor for National Security, Dina Powell for Strategy, was in the room, and none of us felt in any way that that conversation was inappropriate.
General, speak.
Thanks, Sean. General, if you can tell us, when was the decision made to share that information with the Russians? Did the president spontaneously on the spot decide to give that information over? Or was there an interagency process or some kind of formal decision-making process in advance of that meeting with the Russians last week?
Well, as you know, the president, it's wholly appropriate for the president to share whatever information he thinks is necessary to advance the security of the American people. That's what he did. As to your question on had that information been shared previously, I'm not sure about that.
When did you make that decision, though, sir?
When did he make the decision?
When did he make the decision to share the information?
He made the decision in the context of the conversation, which was wholly appropriate. So let's just, I think it's worth recapping one thing here. The president was meeting with the foreign minister about the terrorist threat. He had also raised some difficult issues. What we expected in terms of different behavior from Russia in key areas like Ukraine and as in Syria. But then the president was emphasizing, hey, we have some common interests here. We have to work together in some critical areas. And we have an area of cooperation with transnational terrorist organizations, ISIS in particular, an organization that had already taken down a Russian airliner and murdered over 200 people in October of 2015. And so this was the context of the conversation in which it was wholly appropriate to share what the threat was as a basis for common action and coordination.
Did you make the decision in the moment then, during the context of that conversation?
Excuse me. I want to follow up first with Jennifer's question, which you didn't answer about the Western Wall being part of Israel.
Oh, that sounds like a policy decision for and that's the president's intention. And I did answer the question in terms of what his intention is and what he go with Israeli officials. The president's intention is to visit these religious sites to highlight the need for unity among three of the world's great religions. Unity in confronting a very grave threat to all civilization, and unity in embracing an agenda of tolerance.
Can I finish? Can I get to the question that I had, please? Did the president reveal a city? The spin is that the president revealed the name of the city, and that gave away information that undermined an ally.
Okay, I will answer that. Okay, so all of you are very familiar with the threat from ISIS. All of you are very familiar with the territory it controls. If you were to say, hey, from where do you think a threat might come from territory that ISIS controls, you would probably be able to name a few cities, I would think. And so it was nothing that you would not know from open source reporting in terms of a source of concern. And it had all to do with operations that are already ongoing, have been made public for months.
I think, sorry, to get back to my question, sir. Was this information that was shared with the Russians also the same content that was shared with our allies? And specific to this threat, which the president says was in relation to airlines, is this an imminent threat? Was there a justification for, in that moment, needing to share it with the Russians?
Yeah, I don't want to get into specifics of what exact information is shared with what exact allies, but information on this topic of the threat to aviation was shared with multiple allies. And as you know, there are already policies being put in place to protect against that threat. And you and many others have reported widely on this.
Something that our allies did not. Is that what you were saying?
In terms of the specifics, I have no basis for comparison on what was shared with what country. But I will tell you that it was our impression of all of us that were in the meetings, I've mentioned already, that what was shared was wholly appropriate given the purpose of that conversation and the purpose of what the president was trying to achieve through that meeting.
But there's no imminent threat.
General, when you came out after the story broke, you said that the president did not disclose any sources or methods. He did not reveal anything about military operations. Why were you denying things that were not even reported? What the report said is that the president revealed classified information that had been shared by one of our allies in the Middle East. So the question is simply a yes or no question here. Did the president share classified information with the Russians in that meeting?
And as I mentioned already, we don't say what's classified, what's not classified. What I will tell you again is that what the president shared was wholly appropriate. The story combined what was leaked with other information and then insinuated about sources and methods. So I wanted to make clear to everybody that the president in no way compromised any sources or methods in the course of this conversation.
General, you do say, though, that national security has been put at risk by the leak of this. Do you have any idea how this got out, and what steps are you taking by virtue of discovering this, as you did, to try to limit the potential for any more leaks of national security information?
I think national security is put at risk by this leak and by leaks like this. And there are a number of instances where this has occurred. And I think it's important to investigate these sort of things and to make sure that we have trusted organizations across our government that allows for the free sharing of information and collaboration. I mean, in terms of national security, what is critical is that you can assemble the experts you need. You want a bigger group, right, for any of these complex problems because you need their expertise. You need the tools that they bring to bear from different agencies and departments. And so what we really have to do is make sure we have a very high degree of confidence in all of our organizations and all of our systems and processes so we can do what we need to do for the president, which is give him our best advice and give him options to deal with these very complex problems.
Clearly, you can't have that confidence by virtue of what happened yesterday. So do you have an idea of how this got out, and how can you tighten up the ship, as it were, to ensure, from your perspective at least, that this stuff doesn't get out?
Well, I think it's incumbent on all of us to bring in the people with the right authorities and the right mandate to take a look at how this leak occurred and how other breaches may have occurred as well.
General McMaster. Thank you. General McMaster, to put a finer point on it, is there now an active investigation into how this information was leaked? And can you tell us about who's running that investigation? And I also would like to ask you, given that President Trump is now going to be meeting face-to-face with literally dozens of foreign leaders, if there are sensitivities to his discretion in what sort of information to decide to declassify, how is that something that you were advising him ahead of this foreign trip?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are no sensitivities in terms of me or anybody who's been with the president in many of these engagements. He shares information in a way that is wholly appropriate. And I should just make maybe the statement here that the president wasn't even aware, of where this information came from. He wasn't briefed on the source or method of the information either. So I'm sorry, this is going to be the last question because we do have the president of Turkey coming, I think, momentarily. Thank you very much.
Did he contradict you? Did he contradict you, General?
Steve Lookner, that was National Security Advisor McMaster's press briefing, where he answered some questions about the story about the purported giving of classified information from President Trump to the Russians. Sorry, I'm coming to you from home because this was kind of thrown together, this press briefing, at the last minute, and due to scheduling, I am here and not in the studio, but wanted to come after and talk to you a little bit about the briefing and get your comments. So basically, having just heard the briefing, one big point that stuck out to me was General McMaster repeating again and again and again that he thought that everything President Trump said in the meeting with the Russians was appropriate. He said it was all appropriate. Now, he didn't answer when he was directly asked, did President Trump give any classified information to the Russians? He didn't deny that, and he kind of didn't give a direct answer to that. But what he did repeatedly say is that everything President Trump did was appropriate. So, there's different ways. I'm guessing that different people will interpret this press briefing a lot of different ways. Would be interested in what you think about this press briefing. If you want to write in, feel free to give me a shout. You can contact me on Twitter at Lookner, at Lookner, or email me at steve.lookner@rsbn.tv. Speaking of which, I should get my keyboard out here so I can open up my email. But I'd really be interested in knowing what you think about this briefing today. And like I said before, it's one of these things where I feel like the briefing, it's going to give each side ammunition. Like, people who think President Trump didn't do anything more wrong will say, see, General McMaster said President Trump, everything he did was absolutely appropriate. People who think President Trump did do something on will say, see, General McMaster didn't answer whether President Trump shared classified information. That means he did share classified information. Now, it's possible that what this all comes down to is like that he shared some information with the Russians that some intelligence people think is classified and shouldn't be shared, and other intelligence people think is entirely appropriate to be shared. So I don't know. It's possible that this is just a sort of disagreement, ultimately a disagreement in the intelligence community about what should be shared in this kind of meeting and what shouldn't. But again, we'd love to hear from you and get your feedback about what you thought about this briefing. So feel free to give me a shout at Lookner on Twitter at LOOKNER, or email me steve.lookner@rsbn.tv. I just want to check and see and make sure. Well, Sam Miller wrote in, hope you're doing the post show today. Are you? Well, yes, this is it, Sam. And let me just check my email here and make sure I'm all caught up. I am caught up. And in terms of other things, it was pretty quick, the press conference. And it's interesting. Sean Spicer was supposed to have a press briefing today, and that is now going to be off camera. He's going to have it. He's going to have an off camera, it's called a gaggle, with members of the press. So perhaps we'll get more information from Sean Spicer later. But it's also interesting that, presumably, if Sean Spicer had given his briefing, it would have been, a pretty long briefing, longer than this. And a good part of this was taken up, talking about the president's upcoming trip. So really not this much of this briefing had to do with answering questions about the story from last night. And if Sean Spicer had done an on-camera briefing today, I'm guessing it would have been like 45 minutes straight of questions on that. So I wonder, will we get more information that we didn't get in this briefing in Sean Spicer's briefing, or will he basically say the same thing? It's just his off-camera briefing later today, or will he basically say the same thing that General McMaster said? I think I have a message here. This is from Common Sense writes in. Let me just see. Let me pull up your message here, Common Sense. R.I.P. Seth Rich. We are coming for you, Moloch worshippers. Lock Hitlery up. So what Common Sense, what you're referring to is there was this other story that came out this morning that a couple sources reportedly have said that Seth Rich, who is the DNC, I believe he was a DNC staffer who was killed just before the election, I believe, if I'm getting these facts right, in Washington, D.C., outside his home. It was around 4 a.m. And this murder has never been solved. And the cops have said that they thought it was a botched robbery, but there's questions about that explanation. Fox News did a report, and I know some other outlets did a report. A local Fox station did a report, for example, that had a couple of sources saying that Seth Rich had communications with WikiLeaks, and perhaps had sent a number of emails, had leaked DNC emails to WikiLeaks. Perhaps I saw a report that one source had said he had sent them a bunch of the Bernie Sanders related emails that got so much press around the Democratic National Convention, around the time of the Democratic National Convention last year. So that's a story that's being talked about some today, and we'll keep an eye on that. So Common Sense writes in about that. Let's see here. I'm just checking to make sure I'm all caught up in your messages. 13U writes in, what is entirely wholly inappropriate is the fact that anything made it to the press. So 13U, what you're upset about is that this was a small meeting in the White House, and you're upset that information about this meeting, what was said, made it out to the press. Now, one thing I had read is that I read a report that said email summary or email transcript or some kind of emails about the meeting went out to a group of people. If that's the case, then it's possible that somebody not actually at the meeting was the one who was the leaker. And, it's also possible that somebody at the meeting said something to somebody else about the meeting, and was there that person could have been a leaker too. So certainly this information did somehow get to the media from someone who had inside information. And General McMaster and the White House, I'm sure, are looking into this leak. But you are upset about that, 13U. Thank you for writing in. We have somebody writes in saying, who wishes to remain anonymous. Sorry, I personally think that this briefing was just to clarify some things since yesterday. But what I think we should all do, both on the right and the left, is just take a breath. Take a couple of days off from work, go to the mountains or the beach, go home and rest. think about our ideas, what we think is right or wrong. This country needs a break, a stop. We are currently running towards a cliff face, and both the right and the left are taking us there. We need unity between the sides where possible. That is my thoughts. Thank you, anonymous user. And I will say, things have been going so fast with all of the news stories lately that it does feel like this kind of mad rush at sometimes. And we keep moving from thing to thing to thing. And something I'm sorry about is that, what happened to the health bill? That's really important. We should be talking about that. What happened to tax reform? That's really important. We should be talking about that. Attorney General Sessions announced a new criminal justice policy with drug offender sentencing. That's really important. Very little discussion about that. And not that the stuff on TV shouldn't be discussed at all. I'm not saying don't ever talk about General Flynn or don't ever talk about this meeting in the White House. The problem is it ends up dominating discussion for 24 hours and it's like nonstop frenzy. And discussion of all these other really important things just sort of goes away. And I think those things will be the more important things for the country, myself. But thank you, anonymous person, for writing in. Some more comments here. Zach Mullins writes in, the president can declassify any intel he wants, so none of this really matters anyway. He sees Russia as an ally against ISIS anyway. So one point you're making, Zach, is that the president, even if he gave classified information, this isn't illegal from what I've heard because he has such liberal powers of declassification. Now, someone on the other side could argue, Zach, that even though it's not illegal, it might compromise a certain intelligence source, and that might hurt national security in the long run. That's an argument somebody could give. I will say, McMaster, his language has been, he didn't speak for that much, so there wasn't much time to clarify some things he said. One thing he did say is he said the president didn't reveal any sources, but it's hard to say when he says that, does he mean the president didn't directly reveal any sources or the president didn't give out any information which itself could be used to reveal sources? Because the Washington Post story last night said the president gave out information that Russia could easily use to figure out a U.S. information source. So it's not entirely clear to me what General McMaster said. Now, he might have his reasons for wanting to leave things unclear, but certainly there's not the whole story on the White House side is entirely clear about what went on in the meeting right now. So maybe we'll hear more from Sean Spicer later during his off-camera briefing. But thank you, Zach, for writing in. And also, you're saying, Zach, that you think some sharing of information is appropriate because he sees Russia as an ally against ISIS. Vita Marie writes in, I am sick of this crap! ! He is the president. He did not share classified information. He needs to move out. No one can be trusted. So you're saying a couple things, Vita. You don't think he shared classified information. Also, you think he needs to move out. Someone had written to me yesterday. I don't know if this was on the air or off the air, but somebody had written he shouldn't be in the White House because the White House is totally bugged. Now, I don't know anything about the White House being bugged, but Vita Marie, you seem to be saying something similar in the sense of you feel like you don't trust that White House environment to keep his information, to keep from leaking the information. And actually, I think, Vita, relatedly, this other person wrote in and I think said something like President Trump likes doing work at, Mar-a-Lago or these other places or Bedminster or whatever, because it's there is less of a chance of a leak there. Now, I have no inside information on this, but your suggesting sounds like something sort of similar, which is, hey, the White House doesn't seem to be a place where he can trust the surroundings to keep everything private that he wants kept private. I don't know the facts about that, but I appreciate you writing in, Vita Marie. Thank you. Old Guy 1947 writes in, the president has the authority to declassify secret documents at any time. He is the highest security officer of the USA. And, this is one of these things I need to look up the actual details on this, but I do know that he has very liberal authority to declassify documents. But just to clarify, I don't think that the main charge here from people who think President Trump did something wrong is that he did something illegal. It's that he took information that was previously classified and then gave it to the Russians, and that could hurt national security in some kind of way. So But I understand your point, old guy 1947, is that the president does have very liberal authority to declassify information if he feels it necessary. Space Invader writes in, this is about leaks. Come on, you are better than this. Do your homework. So Space Invader, is your point, Space Invader, that you don't think there's a story here in terms of leaking information at all, and you think the only story that should be looked into is just the leaking story? Now, it's possible that there was no impropriety here. I think there's still information that it would be nice to get a little more information from everyone about what exactly went on. I mean, ultimately, unless you would need a transcript and also information about. Let me take a step back. To really know what happened here and what you'd need a transcript, and you need to know exactly what information in the government is classified and not classified, and also you'd have to know things like what information could be given out that would allow another country to uncover a certain source. And I believe only like the innermost of intelligence experts would know all of that information. So really, there's probably very few people who can definitively say exactly what went on here and to what degree it was appropriate or inappropriate. But General McMaster did say, who is an inside source, he feels that everything was completely appropriate, President Trump did in the meeting. This is from Vita Marie says, it's going crazy because in the liberal media because they are out to get him. I wish he would shut down communication in the White House. I wonder if canceling the briefing today has anything to do with that kind of thing, Vita Marie. QB says, sounds like the Bossert guy advised intelligence community and they leaked it. So Thomas Bossert, thank you QB for writing in. Thomas Bossert is a Homeland Security advisor. He specializes in counterterrorism. He, after this meeting, and I don't recall if he was in the meeting or not, but I know that after this meeting, General McMaster today said that Thomas Bossert contacted the CIA and the National Security Council because he was concerned about things that President Trump had told the Russians during the meeting. And I believe that the words McMaster used to describe these calls where he might have done it out of an overabundance of caution. So it sounded like General McMaster was saying he didn't really think what President Trump said warranted Thomas Bossert contacting the CIA and the NSA, but he was doing it out of an overabundance of caution. And you think, QB, that the people who leaked it might have been the CIA or the NSA because those are the people, or the National Security Council, I believe, those are the people who Bossert contacted after the meeting who were not in the meeting. Zach Mullins follows up with his point saying, exactly, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. I can't even remember what you were like 6 comments ago, Zach, so I apologize for not remembering what our exact conversation was about that. Vita Marie says, that's right, it's less likely that there's a leak in Florida. I don't trust Secret Service either. Hope he has private security, White House not secure. Now, I don't think there's any way he's going to be able to get away from Secret Service, Vita Marie. But thank you for writing in. Ryan says, why would you not tell a foreign minister about a potential threat that could kill Russians? It seems like the anti-Russia hysteria has gone way over the top. And how did officials who were not in the room know what is said? Are the intel listening to his conversations? So it's a good question, Ryan, how people not in the room, if they leaked it, knew what was said. Somebody could have told them. There could be a transcript floating around somewhere. I'd seen a report saying that there is such a transcript. I don't know. Maybe they do make transcripts of these meetings. Maybe President Trump knows about this, but I don't know for sure, of course. In terms of telling the foreign minister, why would you not tell him about a potential threat that could kill Russians? So General McMaster thinks it's appropriate that President Trump thinks it's appropriate they shared this information with the Russians, perhaps for the reason you're saying, that you want to share information with them about a potential threat. Just to clarify, though, I don't think the Washington Post article, the big issue they raised was not that President Trump raised talked about the specific threat with the Russians. It's the level of detail. They said he got into too much detail about where this threat and where they heard this information. And their worry was by getting into this level of detail, that would end up compromising the source. I'm not saying this happened or didn't happen. I'm just saying that's what the story reported. Thanks, Ryan, for your comment. More comments here from A person who does not want to be named says, don't use my name, but it seems convenient that the apparent sharing of classified info was with the Russians. Also convenient, it's right before President Trump goes overseas. Am I the only one that thinks it's dangerous for reporters to be reporting such a serious situation? They don't seem to be all that concerned with our safety here in the U.S. So it sounds like, Layla, you're saying, hey, if somebody wanted to damage President Trump, they could leak information about a meeting with the Russians because that would be extra damaging, and right before a foreign trip where he's going to be talking with other countries who now they might want to share less with him because of what happened. So you are making an interesting point, which is that if somebody did want to make a leak that hurt President Trump, this would be like, in theory, a good time to do it. I have no idea if there was such a leak with the intention of hurting President Trump. But thanks for writing in, Layla. Thank you, God, for Trump writes in. Let's see here. Oh, you say that there was a report today that the CIA director to brief House Intel Committee Tuesday on Trump sharing classified information with Russians. Oh, that just came out. That's an interesting post. So ABC 7 News, WJLA, reported at, looked about 7 minutes ago, they said CIA director to brief House Intel Committee Tuesday on Trump sharing classified information with Russians. So that would be Director McCabe. I'll keep an eye on that, but thanks for sharing that with me. I just retweeted it. But you say, thank you, God, for Trump. They are trying to bring our president down. More messages. GSB.UK writes, hey, Steve, great show as always. Thank you, GSB.UK. But the press briefings are not looking for news, just any tiniest detail they can use to catch Trump out. Disgraceful. So I think a lot of you think this, what GSB.UK thinks. You're unhappy with the press briefings because you think that the press is not in the briefing, like asking a general range of questions. They're really focused on like getting some bad info or making about President Trump or making President Trump look bad. So a lot of you are unhappy with the briefings because of this. And this was not a Sean Spicer briefing today, but it was a White House briefing. Let me get more messages. Sorry. Zach Mullins writes, I was talking about Trump viewing Russia as an ally against Russia, as an ally against ISIS. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Okay, Zach? This is Roswell 1960 says that there's a link on RSBN TV. The presser link is not working. Can we fix it? Oh, I think what happened is this. There was supposed to be a Sean Spicer press briefing today. About an hour ago or so, they announced they were canceling it, and they were instead having this General McMaster briefing. And I believe what happened is we deleted the Sean Spicer event on YouTube, and we forgot to delete it off of the web page. So I'm very sorry about that. I apologize to anybody like Phil who went to the web page to see the press briefing and clicked the link and the link was not working or was not there. It probably said not found because the event was still up on the rsbn.tv page, but the YouTube link had been deleted because the press briefing had been canceled. So we should have put something up on the web page. We're sorry. This happened very fast, and we were doing our best to get the McMaster briefing on the air, but we didn't update the rsbn.tv page. So that's our fault. Our apologies, Phil. We will try not to let that happen again. Ken Conway writes in, Steve, ultimately President Trump needs to consider some lawsuits against the fake news for slander. It's becoming obvious how they are operating with malicious intent. They think they can make 100% false statements in the name of their First Amendment right. For example, they say our unnamed sources tell us that Donald Trump killed his dog yesterday. Is that true? Obviously, it's a phony story like lots of their stories, but they get to ask the questions on a national stage. Then their headline story will read, Donald Trump denies killing his dog. They also think that knowingly receiving highly classified government documents is okay to do. It's disgusting. Thanks again, Ken. So Ken, you think a number of people, a number of viewers have expressed this sentiment that over the past few weeks that you think that the press is saying some false things about President Trump and they're not being held accountable to it. There were those reports. I did notice that, when like a week ago or whenever it was when the General Flynn stuff was coming up, that there were a couple of really big reports. There was that report where a bunch of mainstream media outlets reported that Comey asked for more resources right before he was fired for the Russia investigation, and acting director McCabe denied that in his hearing. And there was another one. There was also there was a story that said widely reported that Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein threatened to quit, and Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein denied that story. So I'm not saying this means any particular every story is false, but there are these cases where these stories get widely reported and then they get denied by the person they're about, and or somebody within who should be seen as authority, and we don't, it doesn't seem like there's really holding of account to the people who released the false story. So, I think with any story, it's good to get it confirmed by multiple sources and keep your eyes open and your ears open and keep your mind open about what could be the real story, especially like the day after it comes out. So it seems like there's still a bunch of questions with this story from yesterday. But Ken, appreciate your comment. If you'd like to comment, taking your comments and your questions here after the McMaster press briefing. I am Steve Lookner. This is Right Side Broadcasting. You can reach me at Lookner on Twitter, at LOOKNER. Also, you can email me at steve.lookner@rsbn.tv. I hope, please, if you enjoy our coverage and giving you an alternative to the mainstream media for covering these kind of breaking news events, hope you consider donating. Even a very small donation helps us because your donations keep us on the air. We can't be on the air without viewer support. If you'd like to donate, you can go to rsbn.tv/donate, rsbn.tv/donate. You can also go to the chat room on YouTube next to the broadcast and click the $sign at the bottom of the chat room. Or you can go to Patreon and set up a monthly donation and get like cool Right Side free stuff in return. So if you want to know more about that, go to www.patreon.com/rsbn. Okay, let's take some more comments. I Stand With Trump says, personally, I believe the president spoke correctly about the subjects they were gathered to speak about, and I believe nothing was said that would harm our country. Also, it makes one wonder if the snowflakes would come unhinged if the president was to declassify files on Area 51. Doing a great job, Steve Maga. Thank you. I Stand With Trump. Let's see here. Yes, so as Jake just let me know, we are going to have in a half an hour, so at noon time, 1 p.m. Eastern, President Trump will be making remarks with President Erdogan of Turkey, joint remarks at the White House. President Erdogan of Turkey is visiting the White House today. I don't know if they'll answer any questions, but they are making remarks, so we will have that stream live. We're gonna stay on for a little while longer here, and then we will go to that live stream. But that should be around. It's supposed to be at 1 p.m. ET, which is a half hour from now. Let me take some more of your comments and questions. Ryan writes in, I would rather trust the people who were in the room rather than anonymous sources. The big story is Seth Rich was the WikiLeaks source, not the Russians. The mainstream media are trying to silence the real issues with fake news. So again, that Seth Rich story, Fox was reporting this morning that a couple sources had claimed that Seth Rich had been in contact with WikiLeaks before he was killed, and that perhaps he had sent WikiLeaks he had leaked a bunch of Democratic National Committee emails to them, including emails about the Bernie Sanders campaign and the Hillary Clinton campaign, and those were emails that became very prominent around the Democratic National Convention, the time of the Democratic National Convention last year. So we will keep an eye on that at Right Side, and if more developments on that come up, we will talk about it on the air. Stop Voter Fraud write-in. Okay, he says that the ABC News meeting, there was a report out. This report, ABC News WJLA tweeted out, CIA director to brief House Intel Committee Tuesday on Trump sharing classified information with Russians. And then Stop Voter Fraud replied to me and said, was already scheduled and will include this topic while he is there. Fake news is always fake news. Now, I think Stop Voter Fraud is saying, well, it's fake news because this hearing was already scheduled. However, I don't believe, it's impossible that this hearing was scheduled in which specifically the CIA director would discuss the information talked about in President Trump's. This meeting was not scheduled before in which the CIA director would talk about President Trump giving information to the Russians, because the story about President Trump giving information to the Russians didn't happen till yesterday. So even if this meeting was scheduled before, I still think it's news that in this meeting, the CIA director will talk about President Trump's meeting with the Russians. John Stronchek, well, I don't think he's replying for this show. He's replying to my tweet, but I'll read it anyway about this meeting. He says, enough already. The president is the head of U.S. intelligence. He decides, not the Senate or Congress. CIA/NSA are crooked. So a couple people seem to be responding to my retweeting the message that there's going to be this briefing today where the CIA director talks to Congress about, in part, about the Russia meeting with the president, as like expressing some sort of opinion on this hearing, that it's a good thing, I guess, or on the meeting with the Russians. I'm not expressing such an opinion at all. I think it's interesting news, so I'm putting it out there. So let me check real quick. Make sure I'm all caught up on your email. Once again, General McMaster said no sources were compromised in his conversation, in his press briefing today. No sources were compromised in President Trump's meeting with the Russians. And I believe Fox News just sent out an email alert saying, National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster says President Trump compromised in no way any sources in his conversation with Russian officials. So if you look at that specifically, that could be seen as denying the Washington Post account, because the Washington Post account said that President Trump gave information which could have compromised sources. Now, perhaps Washington Post would say, well, McMaster is saying President Trump didn't directly compromise sources, but that still is consistent with him giving out information that somebody could use to figure out the source. I don't know. So my original take on this meeting, on this briefing today, was that both sides will probably, whether people were on the President Trump did nothing wrong side or President Trump did something wrong side, I don't think this briefing will necessarily sway people from either side. GSB.UK says, Steve, you're falling into the mainstream media trap, wanting to know every single detail of every single meeting or statement. It's irrelevant. Can you imagine some of Obama's meetings with all the crooked and illegal details he was involved with? It's a joke. Unfortunately, and I think you're going to write something else, GSB.UK. But, so in terms of wanting to know every single detail of every single meeting or statement, I just think to understand whether all I'm saying is to know whether President Trump, to know whether the Washington Post story is true, you need to know what was said in the meeting and what information is classified or not classified. Because the story says that President Trump gave, you'd have to know what was it. The story says President Trump gave previously classified information to the Russians that they could use to compromise a source. So to know whether that's true, you need to, 1, know what he said, 2, know what information was classified beforehand, and 3, know what information would allow a country to compromise a source. All I'm saying is that I don't think I can make an intelligent judgment about the story either way I can't make a conclusive judgment until I knew all those facts, and I'll never know all of them. And at that point, because I won't know all those facts, it comes down to what sources do I trust? But the point I was just making was just to conclusively 100% know whether that story was correct, you would need to know all that information. That's all I'm saying. Thanks, GSB.UK, for writing in. Okay, so we are here, and we're going to stay on, I think, just a couple more minutes here. We're going to go very soon to President Trump is going to be making a joint statement with Erdogan, Turkish President Erdogan, at the White House. That'll start in about 20 minutes or so. We will cover that live. And I'm going to read a couple more messages really quick. We have a request to put a live link to the Trump-Erdogan presser up on rsbn.tv. Phil A says, we need it since folks can't find us since the presser link is gone. So please put a link on the RSBN TV website. I will pass that request along, Phil A. Phil A is a moderator at rsbn.tv. R. Rhett writes, in Hi Steve, as you know, there have been recent fake news stories about the imminent firings of Sean Spicer and Reince Priebus. Other alleged firing stories in the recent past have been about Sebastian Gorka and Steve Bannon, none of which have proven to be true, at least so far. One interesting thing about President Trump's recent interview with Judge Jeanine, Mr. Businessman Trump said Spicer is a very nice guy. I have been in business long enough to know that comment is not necessarily a compliment. President Trump may want Spicer to be more aggressive against the media and call them out for fake news when they deserve it. There will always be a trail of breadcrumbs, but before we swallow them, we should see where they lead. All the best of blessings, RR. Thank you, RR, for writing in. So, look, maybe there won't be any firings. I give you that. Now, Mike Allen, who wrote the Axios story, didn't say, just to be clarified, on that particular firing story, what that story was that President Trump was considering a shakeup, but it might not actually happen. So Mike Allen did not say there will definitely be firings. That was not his report in Axios. That's the one I talked about on the air yesterday. Okay, I think we're caught up with the messages here. Let me just make sure. Oh, no, I want to get to them. Trump text, there's a spade, at Lindy K, 46220 sent me a link to a story about another version of the Seth Rich story, one that claims he sent over 44,000 DNC emails to a journalist, best friend of WikiLeaks. Thank you for sending that in. And we are right now, okay, we got to go to the White House now. So I'm going to wrap it up from here. And let me just make sure we're all set. So I'm going to wrap it up from here. Thank you for watching our coverage of General McMaster's briefing. Please go if you want to see it. We are up now live, awaiting President Trump's... I don't know if we're live yet, but we're going live soon. But we are going to show President Trump and Erdogan, Turkish President Erdogan, giving a joint statement at the White House. Maybe they'll answer some questions. I don't know. So check that out at Right Side Broadcasting. For now, thank you for watching, and I will see you later on. Have a good one.